Hello, this is Jeff Vanderstelt, Executive Director of Saturate and host of the Saturate podcast. Saturate exists to serve and equip leaders to start and strengthen unified gospel city movements that lead to gospel saturation, to the end that every woman, man, and child has repeated opportunities to meet Jesus through his church on mission everywhere and every day. We believe this will require, as Jesus prayed in John 17, that the church is unified in a region, collaborating around 5 key initiatives. First, citywide prayer. And this isn't just prayer in the sense of talking to God, but also collectively listening to God to lead us by his Spirit and to give us the game plan for what he is doing and what he wants to do through his church. The second is disciple-making strategies. And this is a commitment to make sure every Christian in every expression of the church in the region we're working in is fully equipped to be a disciple-making disciple. Third, leader health. We know that this is going to be done and led by leaders leading disciples, and those leaders need to be healthy, emotionally healthy, spiritually healthy, relationally healthy. And the fourth one is serving the city, bringing an expression of the kingdom of God so that we might see our prayer, your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, realized as we extend Jesus' rule and reign from our own hearts into the cities we live in by serving them in tangible ways. And then lastly, that we would start new kingdom initiatives like new church plants, new businesses, new nonprofits, all committed to the previous 4. Now, in this particular series that we're in, 180, we're considering the shifts we need to make to return to disciple making. So we're spending a lot of time on disciple-making strategies, and the content of these episodes can also be found in my most recent book, 180, A Return to Disciple-Making, that I wrote as a partnership with Exponential to really set up the theme of Exponential 2024. You can get that book online at Amazon if you want it in paperback form, or you could also download it for free at exponential.org. if you are okay with an ebook. But I want to just continue this series, and we are in the third shift, and that is the shift from attending to attaching. Paul told Timothy in 1 Timothy 1:5 that the purpose of his instruction is love from a pure heart and sincere faith, reflecting Jesus' words that the greatest commandment is to love God with all we are, to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. Now, Jesus takes us even further, and he says that we're also to love our enemies. And this idea of love, according to the scriptures, is a giving of oneself to another. Jesus said in John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son." So this love isn't just a feeling, it's a true giving of one's whole self in a genuine relationship. Now, more recently, people who are studying the brain and relational health and even experts in psychology are using the language of attachment love to describe this kind of love that we read about in the scriptures. We see it when Jesus says in John 15, "If I abide in you and you in me, you'll bear much fruit, but apart from me, you can do nothing." You also read about it in John 17 as Jesus praying, "Father, as I am in you and you are in me, may they," meaning all those who will become his disciples, "may they also be in us, and may they be one." And that abiding or that in one another is really this attachment love, this giving of self and receiving of another in such a way that we are intimately acquainted and attached to one another. And this is really the nature of who God is. God is eternally lived in community and always existed in a self-giving form of love in relationship, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so the role of leaders is not just to create programs for people to attend, but to create relational spaces to help people lovingly attach to God and to one another. So that's the third shift we need to make, from attending to attaching. Now, the first part about this shift is we got to recognize that people live and engage in particular ways in social spaces that are unique and different. In fact, there's a work that's been done by Edward T. Hall. He was a sociologist in 1960, and he wrote about the theory of proxemics. And he has a very helpful book, or did a really good study on that work. And then Joseph Myers actually wrote a book, The Search to Belong, based upon that research around how we engage and belong in each different social space in different ways. Alex Absalon and Bobby Harrington did a really good job taking Joseph Myers' work and then beginning to apply it to disciple making. And the title of that book is Discipleship That Fits. And in it, they walk through these different relational spaces: divine space, transparent space, personal space, social space, and public space. And I want to, for the purposes of talking about shifting from attending to attaching around disciple making, I want to just walk through those spaces and build a little bit more on their writing. Now, when we think about the divine space, we're thinking about our time alone with God. If we look at Jesus often withdrew to solitary places to be alone with his Father. He cultivated this space so that he could say things like this in John 5:19. Truly, I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees the Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. And what Jesus is fundamentally saying is he's so attached to the Father that everything he's doing is also what the Father is doing. I often tell people, if you want to know what God the Father is like, just look at the life and ministry of Jesus. He was only doing what the Father was doing. And so if you want to know the nature and character of God, Jesus is the full display of deity in bodily form, which is why when Philip tells Jesus to show them the Father, Jesus says to him, "Don't you know me, Philip? How long have I been with you? If anyone's seen me, they've seen the Father." And he makes it really clear that the Father is in him and he's in the Father. And everything he's saying, Jesus says, is not on my own authority. It's actually the Father living in me who's doing his work. And that's that attachment relationship Jesus is talking about. And he calls us into the same kind of a relationship. When we look at John 14, Jesus promises when he leaves, he's not going to leave us alone. He's not going to leave us as orphans, but he's going to send his Spirit to come and be with us, to teach us, to empower us, to direct us, to guide us, to enable us to do the very same things that Jesus did. In fact, he says, all those who will believe in me will do the works that I do, and even greater works will he do. And then he continues saying, if you ask anything in my name, that I will do. And so what Jesus is saying is, by my Spirit at work in you, I'll keep doing the work that I did in my own body. I'll do it now through you, my body, the church. And he promises that if we'll abide in him, he promises that if we will stay attached to him, that the fruit that will come out of our life will look like the fruit of Jesus in his own ministry and the fruit of the Spirit. And so we want to cultivate this space. We want to intentionally lead people to know how to engage in this divine space so that they can learn to attach to Jesus. They can learn to abide in Jesus. They can learn how to be filled and led and directed by the Spirit, so that everything we do is an outcome of what he is doing in us and through us. In fact, Jesus says that's how people are going to know that you belong to me, is not only your love for one another, but my very presence or our, his love in us and our love for him. That's how people are going to know. And that's also the thing that's going to compel us to do his work. His love in us, our attachment to him, is what's going to motivate and empower us to do the very work that Jesus has sent us to do. Now, sadly, so many of us have wrongly believed that if we just tell people what to do, give them the right ideas, instruct them in the way to go, that they're going to live this out. But we know that they need more than just information. As we've talked about before in our previous episodes, they need true transformation, and they need to be developed in a whole-brained way. A lot of our training, a lot of our teaching is very left brain. It's very concept oriented, strategic. It's rational. And that's all very important, but we also need to develop our right brain, the relational, the emotional. In fact, Michael Hendricks and Jim Wilder, in their book, The Other Half of Church, talk about this. In fact, they say this: many Western Christians believe character is formed by thinking correctly, believing truth, and making wise choices in light of the truth. If all of this is empowered then by the Spirit, then we're on the path to Christian maturity, they say. This is the philosophy that he says I used to help people grow in their faith. He even remembers during one training that he said to change our character, we need to change our thinking. But the problem with this conclusion, according to both these guys in this book, is that it's half-brained. It assumes that we're primarily formed through just left brain development, through language, logical thinking, problem solving, and strategies. Again, which is very, very important. Our beliefs and our doctrine, those ideas are formulated in the left brain, but they go in deeper, not just through knowing them cognitively, but through knowing them relationally. That the very truth of the love of God is not something we can just know with left brain, but we've got to actually experientially know it in the right brain. We've got to have this connection to God. In order to know God, we can't just know ideas about. I don't just know about my wife. I know my wife because of our relationship with her. So it's the same thing that we see in the scriptures. 1 John 4, in fact, talks about this, that if we say we know God and yet don't love our brother who we can see, we can't see God, John says, then we don't really know God, because God is love. And what is he talking about there? He's saying if you are abiding, later on he says that you know that you're abiding in God who is love if you have love for your brother. So for John, knowing is not just rational, but it's relational. And it includes this attachment-based acquaintance with God's love in our very being. I've got some really good friends who started an organization called the Eden Project. And Nathan Wagnon is one of the founders. He's done some really great work. I think he actually did his PhD work around this idea of a God image and God concept. In fact, he talks about and even does some research around this idea that we all have God concepts. Like, we believe God is love. We have a concept that God is truth. We have a concept that God is holy. We have all these concepts about God. And let's just take God is love as one of the concepts. I think if you asked any Christian, do you believe God is love? They would say, yes, absolutely. But the problem is our concept that God is love, which is very much a left brain idea, often doesn't line up with our image of God. Many of us have, because of our upbringing or our experiences in the church, many of us have a view of God that is one who's so angry at us, who's very disappointed with us, who is kind of stays far from us, is distant. And so we can say we believe in a God who is love, but our image of God, the view that we have inside of us about what God's actually like, is going to have more power over how we relate to God than the concept, which is why we've got to have this formation, not just be left brain ideas, but right brain relationship. And so as you think about this divine space, and as you think about leading people to engage in this divine space, ask yourself, are we helping people to not just read their Bible and know ideas, but also listen to God through his word? Are we encouraging people not just to form thoughts in prayer, but to engage relationally with God through prayer, both in sharing what's going on honestly within our own hearts and in our own lives, but also listening to what God has to say to us as we engage in listening prayer. So think about all the divine space opportunities. And in our next episode, we're going to actually unpack them even more in terms of the practices. But just ask yourself, are we creating those spaces? Are we helping our people engage in those spaces? And are they learning how to attach with God versus just do pure left brain activity, talking about God, learning ideas about God, cognitively asserting these truths? We've got to help them attach in that divine space. Now, Jesus also had another space called the transparent space with about 3 other guys. And we think that space is around 3 to 5 other people. Ideally, we found somewhat 3 to 5 of the same sex so that we can be transparent and open. In fact, I would say this space for me, other than my wife, is the space where people know the most about me. And I'm really open and share. They know my story. They know my struggles. I confess my sin, my doubts, my fears. Well, this is where I really show up as openly and vulnerably as I possibly can. We call them DNA groups in most of our Soma churches, and they're generally almost always triads. But Jesus had this too. He had Peter, James, and John. They got to see him transfigured in front of them so that they saw as much as Jesus could possibly show them. And so we want to follow after Jesus. He had these really close friends, and we need to have close spiritual friends that can continue to remind us who we are, how we've been made. That, like Psalm 139 says, you're fearfully and wonderfully made. You're a big deal. You really matter to God. So we can't just go out there and love everybody else. We got to learn how to take care of ourselves so we have something to give when we're thinking about making disciples and being on mission in everyday life. So we want to create a space on a regular basis where we can be transparent, where we can be vulnerable. Transparent, we're really seen. Vulnerable, we're in need and we're willing to submit ourselves to one another. That word vulnerable actually means able to be wounded. In a sense, we're taking off all the armor, we're taking off all the protection, and we're letting brothers or sisters be the kind of brother or sister that brings loving wounds, not to harm, but rather bringing truth that isn't always easy to hear, putting up a mirror so we can see what's going on inside of our hearts and minds. And so do you have this space in your context where people can truly be seen, truly be known, truly engage in an attachment style disciple making with a few very, very close friends? I tell people all the time, this is a space that you probably want to, pick. You want to pick the people that are in this, the people that you feel safe with. In a lot of cases, I think you could journey through your whole life with these kinds of people. These don't, I would say these don't need to constantly be multiplying out new ones. Though we want to keep multiplying these kinds of groups, I don't know that we want to keep having people break up and start over, again and again and again, because I think oftentimes then we just learn how not to show up because we have no safe space. So this is a safe space to be transparent and vulnerable. And then third, there's the personal space. This consists of a close circle of friends. This is probably going to be 12 to 20. A lot of times these are what, we see in like a small group or the core of a missional community. This is a place where you can practice the one another's. Jesus had his 12 and, probably an additional 5 to 7 women that were also in this space. And they did life together. They did meals together. They served together. They practiced forgiving one another, bearing with one another, carrying each other's burdens. Like, we need to have this place where our divine space is helping us grow in love with God. Our transparent space is helping us actually grow to love ourselves so that we can, in the personal space, practice loving one another. Remember, the command is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's divine space. Love your neighbor as yourself. So as yourself is that transparent space where people can help you become everything you were meant to be. And then you practice living that out in this personal space, your family, your roommates, and then hopefully a group of people journeying together like a small group or a core of a missional community where we really can practice those one another's and grow up in using our gifts, serving each other, doing all the things that help us take next steps on our own journey towards Christ-likeness. The fourth one is social space. And this can be, I think, anywhere between 20 to 70. This, when some people think about a missional community, it's the extension of their missional community. It's not just the core, but it's the people that they're on mission with and for, your neighbors, co-workers, a particular people group. You can see this like the Feast in Cana is a good example of that social space where we're engaged in something together. We probably know most of the people by name. We're probably experiencing more missional living. A lot of the blessed rhythms that you've heard us talk about before are going to get practiced here. This is, Jesus is going to Matthew's house for Matthew's party or Zacchaeus' house. Those are all great examples of that kind of space. And the question for you is, are you helping your people engage in those spaces where they live, where they work, where they learn, and where they play? And are they doing it with others that are a mission with them? So they're learning how to go be the church in everyday life amongst people who aren't ever going to go to a church building or activity. So do you have that space? Have you cultivated that space? Are you training your people to be on mission in that space? And then the last space is the public space. And this is when you're getting more than 70 people. You see, Jesus has got the 120. He's with the crowds. This is a kind of event where you're together, all engaging something in common, but you probably don't know everybody. It could be like a concert or a football game. And this is really, in a lot of ways, where most people's Sunday gathering fits in. You generally don't know everybody at a Sunday gathering or a Saturday gathering, whenever it is you gather with the larger body of the church, but you still have something in common. You're there for many of the same reasons. You're hearing the same things. You're having common experiences. And these are really, really important to have. And yet, let's also be honest, they by themselves are significantly insufficient to make disciples. They play a part, but it has a limited part. You can instruct, you can inspire, you can encourage, you can have stories told that spur one another on. You can see the variety of gifts used, but not everybody's going to be able to get to use their gift necessarily. So it's got limitations. It's important to have, but it's got limitations. And when I think about this space, I'm often asking leaders, how intentional are they about this space? And how realistic are they about what this space can and cannot do? Intentional. Are you thinking about your order of service in your gathering? Is it truly equipping God's people? The word liturgy, which is what kind of the order of service of a Sunday or any kind of gathering for that matter, that word liturgy means the work of the people. So the question I'll often ask is, how much work did the people do when you gathered that equipped them for all the other spaces, or at least inform them for how to engage in those other spaces? So, how are you doing at those spaces? What are you doing in those spaces? How are you intentionally engaging those spaces and equipping your people to participate in those spaces? Now, it's important to say that we live and interact relationally in different ways in each one of those spaces. Obviously, the divine space is going to be the most intimate of those spaces because we're talking about literally dwelling in God and God dwelling in us. And that is meant to be the most intimate and transformative space that we have. We're not going to be doing a lot of the things we do in the other spaces in that divine space. We need to protect that space. We need to regularly have that space. We need to realize that that space is not just transformative, but healing. And it's remarkably powerful for teaching us how to be empowered by God. I recently been reading a book because of the anxiety that I see around us and in many of our kids who are Gen Z. The book is called The Anxious Generation. And it's not a Christian book, but it is a really, really important book to read to understand what our technology, especially our phones, are doing to our kids. And as I've been interacting with my own kids and with parents who have kids the same age, one of the things we have discovered, and they even talk about this a bit in the book, is we've got to help our kids and ourselves shut everything off. We've got to get into silence and solitude and stop taking in input and just be present with ourselves, present with God. This is one of those divine spaces that we've got to seriously cultivate. And there are many more practices in our divine space that we got to cultivate, but that's one that I think is of the utmost importance right now in our present age. In the transparent space, you're going to be incredibly vulnerable. You're going to be very transparent. To be clear, we don't necessarily want to do that in every other space. In fact, I find that when people are in social space or personal space and they begin to do the kind of behaviors that you would only do in transparent space where you're really revealing a lot, most people naturally feel uncomfortable. And healthy people know how to engage each space in appropriate ways. And if they're engaging in an inappropriate way in a particular space, it's possible either they're unhealthy or they don't have a place for that practice. For instance, I've seen a lot of people who are in the personal or social space start to confess out loud some very, very personal things that would probably make a larger group feel pretty uncomfortable. And the question I'm always asking in my mind is this person aware that this is not the appropriate space to do that? And the second question is it possible they don't actually have a place to do that? And I think that's true for a lot of people. They need that place, but they don't have that place. So they practice that vulnerability in the wrong space. So you'll notice at a personal level, we're going to share prayer requests. We're going to get fairly vulnerable, not overly transparent, but pretty vulnerable. It will be more open in that space than the social space. And then the social space, which for a lot of people, that's the space where, you're at like 50 to 70, you're just not going to do some of those things you do more in the personal and transparent space. And then definitely not in the public space are you going to engage in those ways. And so you might even want to ask about your spaces and your strategic plan. Are we trying to do the wrong activities and practices in the wrong spaces, thus leading those spaces to never be able to become what they were meant to be? So does your public space feel a lot more like you're trying to do personal or transparent activities? It's likely your space is going to get smaller because the social cues that people are going to read are going to be, hey, this space is not for a large group of people. This is meant to be for a much smaller group. So it's important to know how these spaces work. It's important to know the kinds of practices we engage in each space. And it's important to ask yourself, have we intentionally designed these spaces or at least equipped our people to gather in these spaces and engage these spaces in intentional ways for their own spiritual formation and their mission of making disciples of others? Hey, it's been great being with you. I hope this episode serves you as you continue to think about the shifts you need to make to return to disciple making. As you think about shifting from attending to attaching, continue to ask, are we building out the kind of spaces that are leading to attachment-based formation, attachment with God, self, others, and those who don't yet believe in Jesus? And how effectively are they accomplishing the purpose of making disciples? What might you need to change? What might you need to shift? But I'm hopeful that this conversation is just another help in you moving forward towards that shift to return to disciple making. If you would like more information about how you can grow in your own ability to make disciples or how you can form a culture for disciple making, please check out saturatetheworld.com. We have a lot of resources, a lot of training there. You can access a lot of it for free. If you want to become a member, it's a very small monthly fee, like a Netflix fee, that enables us to keep making more resources for you. But it literally has hundreds and hundreds of videos and PDFs and training tools that you can use and begin to implement in your own context. If you're realizing your context needs a lot more directional help, hey, please reach out to us. We have a new offering called the Disciple Making Lab, which helps leaders redesign their present ministry in a much more effective way towards disciple making. We help people define disciple, clarify their disciple making pathway, build the tools and vehicles to accomplish it well. It's a 1-year journey, so it's a bit of a commitment, but it's one of the best things I think we have to offer, and we could really help you a lot with that. We also have other things that could help you, like coaching, some one-day training. So if there's anything we can do, please reach out. You can just send an email to hello@saturatetheworld.com to get more and more information. Again, thanks so much for your time. I pray that God, by His Spirit, encourages, empowers, and equips you to become more effective at making disciples who make disciples in your context, where you live, work, learn, and play.